Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jennifer Kowalkowski, and I welcome you to my presentation, Social Networks and Health Among Farm Owner Operators. I would like to acknowledge first the Midwest Nursing Research Society and the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Nursing for grant funding that supported this work. This is a brief overview of what I'll be talking about today. First, why farm owner operators and social networks are important, including what social networks are and why they matter. What I did, specifically what I wanted to learn and who I talked with to learn that information. I'll cover what I learned through this research process, and then what I can do with the information I learned from the research to really move farm owner operator health forward. As many of you know, health outcomes tend to be worse for rural populations than for urban populations. But we also know that for many health conditions, farmers fare worse than their rural counterparts. More recent research has shown actually that farm owner operators have worse health outcomes yet than other farm workers. Now, what contributes to these outcomes that are worse for farm owner operators? Let's begin with farming is stressful. Working harder and longer cannot change the hassles and challenges that farmers face every day, things like broken tractors, sick cattle, droughts, or even floods. And stress affects our health and well-being. In particular, stress that occurs in response to things that we have no control over or cannot change tends to be the stress that causes the most disruptions in our health and well-being. So how does this manifest in farmers? Well, as you can see from this information here, farm owner operators have notably higher rates of anxiety and depression than all other farmers and rural non-farmers. Rates of suicide in this population are almost twice that of other farmers, and disability are 10 percentage points higher for farm owner operators than all other farmers. Some things that we do know about farm owners that contribute to these higher rates are things like extending their workday and taking risks more than other farm workers. In addition, farm owner operators are less likely to ask for help in order to get work done. In doing so, this increases the likelihood that they get fewer hours of sleep, increasing daytime sleepiness, which can then increase the odds of injury during work. But what is it that's so unique about farm owner operators that put them at this increased risk? It's that farm owner operators make the decisions that affect the viability of the farm, and that farm owner operators bear the financial liability for the farming operation. These unique characteristics significantly increase their risks and exposures compared to other farm workers. So the unique occupational roles and responsibilities that farm owner operators have create a situation where they have different health risks and health exposures. As such, in the United States, we have over 2 million farm owner operators that face greater risks for premature morbidity and mortality than their other farming counterparts. Now, you may ask why I'm even focusing on this. Well, I found no studies that have focused on the health and well-being of farm owner operators. And I believe that all people who work in farming, ranching, or other agricultural fields deserve optimal health and well-being. But what are social networks? Well, social networks in this context are a collection of what are called social actors and the relationship between those actors. And what's important is that interactions occur between actors, and that's the social part of it. So there's a social process that occurs between actors, and those interactions then facilitate exchanges. And what those exchanges and exposures are things like opportunities and resources. Now, we have many social networks, and each social network and all those people and social actors that are in them play a very specific role and specific purpose. So within this context, the resources and opportunities that I'm talking about are things related to social support. There's many ways to describe social support, and this is just one of those ways. So social support can be described as instrumental, emotional, informational, or appraisal. Instrumental support could be things like money or even being loaned a tractor to use. Words of support are an example of emotional social support. Informational social support can be things like a new method for measuring grain moisture. And appraisal support would be perhaps words of saying, hey, a job well done, from a father to either a son or a daughter who might be taking over a farming business. So this image brings together why it is I was looking at farm owner operators and social networks. So looking at accessing social support through social networks, that actually can reduce the negative effects of stress on health and well-being, and has been shown to decrease morbidity, mortality, and healing time, and also increase reports of health and well-being, as well as self-esteem and suicide resilience in other populations. So I was curious, what did this look like with our farm owner operators? So I did conduct a formal study, and I was really interested in the positive aspects of social support through social networks. So I really did want to know what role social networks played in mitigating occupational related stress for farm owner operators, essentially what the composition and structure of these networks look like for farm owner operators, and what the context of production agriculture and the role of farm owner operators, how that influenced the social networks, and then what resources farm owner operators used or mobilized in their social networks, specifically related to their health and well-being. So the purpose of my study was to explore social networks for farm owner operators and the social supports available to them for mitigating the negative effects of occupational related stress. And I did that through identifying essentially the individuals, groups, and organizations and events that farmers identified in their social networks, as well as the characteristics of those actors. The description of the social support resources in farm owner operators' social networks, and then looked at how those pieces then kind of fit together, so those relationships, and how that then affected the function of the social networks in relation to the access or exchange of social support within the network. So I talked to farm owner operators in a Midwestern county. I invited all farm owner operators who are 18 years of age and older and who had written and spoken English proficiency to complete a mailed survey. And the main question that I asked was whether or not there were specific people that they talked to or went to for information to make sense of things related to their farm when those things began to weigh heavy on their mind, which essentially meant causing stress. Now, this question was actually developed in collaboration with a group of farmers. So I felt it was actually getting to the question that I was really asking. And I asked farmers then to tell me not only the people that they talked to, but characteristics about them, how they were related to those individuals, how often they contacted them, and in what ways. And then those things helped me understand both the network composition, structure, and function. So of the 385 farm owner operators I contacted, 257 were ineligible for a final sample of 128, of which 71 returned the sample for a final response rate of 55.5%. So what did I learn? I learned that when asked to rank their stress in the last year related to the farm, farmers generally had high rates of stress. The overall mean on a scale from 1 of no stress to 6 extreme stress was 3.9. Females rated their stress higher than males, and that difference was statistically significant. And those in operating dairy had higher rates of stress than all other groups. And again, that was statistically significantly higher. I was able, with the scale that I used, to look at whether or not farmers were experiencing distress, which means that the stress they were under actually caused interruptions or problems within their life. 18% of farmers were at low risk for developing distress, whereas nearly 45% were at high risk for developing distress, and a near 34% were actually actively experiencing distress. I learned that farm owner-operators have smaller social networks than other farmers and the general public. Farm owner-operators reported 2.4 personal contacts, whereas farmers rated in other studies between 9 and 14, and the general public between 5 and 15. Farmers also indicated that they had greater comfort talking about issues related to the farm with family members and individuals who were female, as well as those they've known for 10 years or more. They had a greater preference in talking to other farmers in person and family or friends over the telephone. Texting was used preferentially for the younger group of farmers, or those aged 25 to 44 years. It was interesting that there was a positive association between high stress and the number of alters, but it's unknown what that relationship was, whether or not those with high stress had high alters because they were seeking additional support. I also learned that male and female farm owner operators use resources differently. Generally, farm magazines, farm papers, and local cooperatives were the main source of information that farm owner operators used. But when looking at males and females, females were more likely to listen to podcasts and seek information from the National Farm Medicine Center, whereas males were more likely to seek information from NPR, radio stations, and YouTube. In addition, whereas farm owner-operators reported on average 2.4 individuals they used for social support, they reported on average 6.1 resources that they sought related to stress of the farm. Now, from this study, I learned that farm owner-operators access different networks for their personal health and well-being than for farm health and safety. For example, a farmer who is stressed out about their farm and they're worried about their health, they're going to talk to someone different than if they're concerned about how to improve safety of tractor use on their farm. Now, this is important because historically, research has focused on social networks and other networks related to farm health and safety for addressing personal health and well-being of farmers. Through the study, I also learned that farm owner-operators face a high symptom burden of and risk for occupational-related distress. And this isn't necessarily a new finding, but it certainly adds to the body of literature that we have and focuses specifically on farm owner-operators and separates them from other farm workers. So what are the implications of these findings, and how can we use this information and move our learning forward to better support the health and well-being of farm owner-operators and other farmers? Well, first we need to better understand the composition of farmers' social networks, how farmers' social networks form, and how farmers use their social networks. So based on prior research, it's clear that we've made some assumptions about farmers' social networks and how those social networks are used. And the findings from this study have shown that those assumptions do not hold across all situations. So once we have a better understanding of those social networks, we then need to provide resources and opportunities that farmers want. And what that means is supporting farmers in the way that makes sense for them within the context in which they live. And then also providing wraparound supports for their social networks. So if we understand who farmers to turn to in times of help, we can understand then people who may then bear additional burden of supporting those individuals. And by providing support not only to farmers, but to the people who provide support, we can continue to build the social capacity within these communities and continue to build towards optimal health and optimal well-being. So there is so much about this research that I couldn't share in this brief presentation, but I hope that I was able to paint a compelling picture and a compelling story of why it is that social networks are important to look at in the study of health and well-being, not only of farm owner-operators, but of all of our farmers and our agricultural populations. I welcome your questions and comments. I encourage you to check out my reference page, which can be accessible either by the link or by the QR code. and I encourage you to contact me via email with any questions. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.